Hi all, this is Jenny here from Ashfield College, and I'm just going to do a quick run through both paper 1 and paper 2 of higher level English with you before the exams start this week. So first and foremost, obviously, paper 1 is a 2-hour and 50-minute exam, as I'm sure you're aware of already. Both papers are equally weighted, so that means that you have 200 marks for paper 1 and 200 marks for paper 2 as well. Just taking a quick look at paper 1 first and foremost. So paper 1, as I'm sure again you're probably aware of, is composed of two different sections. So you've got section 1 comprehending and section 2 composing. Of the two papers, it's obviously the one that you can't really prepare for hugely. There's bits and pieces that obviously you can you can kind of prepare, but there's very little overall that you can prepare for. Most of your preparation obviously comes for paper 2. So two different sections, section 1 comprehending and section 2 composing. So section 1 comprehending consists of 3 different texts. You must answer question A on one text and question B on another. This means that you will not answer on one text at all, and you must not answer question A and question B on the same text. So I think sometimes in the moment in the exam, students kind of panic and they can't remember whether or not they're supposed to answer a question on each text. You're not. You're just supposed to answer question A on one text and question B on another. So that means that there's one text that you won't touch at all. If you have any doubts, if kind of last minute nerves and panic and things like that set in, bear in mind all of those instructions are clearly written on the outside of the paper. Use them, okay? Have a quick look and obviously make sure that you know what you're answering and where you're supposed to be answering it. Again, obviously you're not supposed to answer question A and question B on the same text. What happens if you do? Well, obviously both questions will be marked. And then like hypothetically, let's say you get 35 out of 50 on question A and you get 40 out of 50 on question B, you'll be awarded the higher of the two, but the other one unfortunately will become a 0. So just make sure that you don't let that happen to you. And as I've said, while that seems like kind of the most logical piece of advice in the world right now, I think when you go into the exam, it's the first exam that you guys will be sitting. Sometimes kind of logic and reason just kind of flies out the door. So try to settle yourself, try to remain calm. And as I've said, if you've got any doubts whatsoever, read the front of the exam paper where it'll clearly tell you what you're supposed to do. In addition to that, after each of the texts, it clearly says to you that you can't answer question A and question B on the same text. So obviously take heed of all the instructions. Section 2 on paper 1 then is composing. It consists of 7 different essay titles, and again you must answer one. Those essay titles will be anything from personal essays to short stories to articles to speeches, etc. Obviously whatever you've been practicing, whatever you've been most comfortable with up until now, stick with that on the day. Like, don't decide to suddenly, write a short story if you've never written one before, for example, no matter how appealing the essay title might be. So kind of stick with what you know, stick with what you've practiced as well. Just kind of another few sort of like little tips and stuff for paper 1. As I've said, there's very little that you can kind of prepare for that. Number 1, obviously revise the different genres of writing. So be familiar with what makes, a narrative piece a narrative. Be familiar with what makes a speech. Be familiar with what makes, an autobiography autobiographical, etc. So just kind of make sure that you know like little snippets of each of the genres. Revise your writing skills and techniques specific to paper 1. Again, this is kind of just sort of minimal stuff. So like go back over your formatting of letters, for example. Go back over your formatting of diary entries and blogs. Go back over your formatting of articles. Look through your different speech writing techniques that you can use. Look through the different kind of ways, the different aspects that they'll be looking for in short stories, for example. So just make sure that you're kind of familiar with all of that. And beyond that, there's not a huge amount else you can prepare. Again, make sure that you're familiar with the structuring of your question A answers. So make sure that you have, your short intro, your main body paragraphs, all using the PQE format, which is obviously point, quote, explain. Some of you may be familiar with PIE, which is PI, which is point, illustrate, explain. It's the same thing. Some of you may have used SEQ in the past, which is state, explain, quote. Again, any variation of those is absolutely fine. And then question A normally appears as follows. So You've got 10 minutes to read the text, so you'll have to kind of speed read through it. Question 1 and question 2 are normally 15 marks each. That means that you've got 10 minutes to write both of them, and your answers should be somewhere around an A4 page in length, like give or take. That's just kind of a ballpark figure. Obviously, some of you might write a little bit less, some of you might write a little bit more. Again, it'll depend on things like your handwriting size, etc. Question 3 then tends to be, I suppose, the one that sort of separates, you know, your H1 from your H2, your H2 from your H3, and so on. It's worth slightly more, so it's worth 20 marks. You've got 15 minutes to answer it, and you need to be writing just a little bit more for that, so normally about a page and a quarter, again, kind of give or take. Because that question normally requires a little bit of independent thinking, a little bit of kind of thinking outside the box. Now, that's, as I've said there in the PowerPoint, that's normally how question A appears. They have been known in the past, now they haven't done it recently, but in the past they have done it whereby it's been 20, 15, 15. Now they haven't done that in quite some time, but just make sure that you have a quick flick over to the side and that you know how many marks are going for each question. I think it's highly unlikely that they'll mess with that format. It's been quite some time since they did change it up, but again, just be aware that that is something that they can do. You know, it doesn't have to be 15, 15, 20, even though for the past however long that is how it has been. Paper 2 then is arguably, I would probably say, the kind of the tougher of the two. So it's 3 hours and 20 minutes. So it's like, you know, it absolutely is an endurance test. It's 200 marks, so same marks. And I suppose if you want to break it down, it's 200 marks in 200 minutes. So therefore, you're trying to get 1 mark every single minute that you're in the exam. It's composed of 3 different sections. So you've got section 1, the single text, section 2, the comparative study, and section 3, which is poetry. Section 1, the single text, consists of 5 different texts with 2 questions on each. For most of you, that will probably be where you'll answer on Shakespeare. Some people answer on Shakespeare in the comparative. Most of you will probably do it in the single text instead. And there'll be 2 questions there on that. You only answer 1 question on whichever text you have studied. And again, play to your strengths there. Most of the time, 1 question will be on character or characters, so like development, relationships, etc. And then the other question is sometimes on themes. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be like that, but again, most of the time it is. Section 2, the comparative study, consists of 3 different comparative modes with 2 questions on each. You must answer only 1 question on 1 mode. This is one of the slight changes that they've made to this year's assessment. So you know the way they've kind of changed things up a little bit. Now we are getting back to kind of pre-COVID times, but this is one of the slight changes that remains kind of now. So in the past, there would have been 3 comparative modes on, but only 2 would have come up on the day. For you guys, the 3 modes are on and you are guaranteed all 3 will be there. So it basically means that you only have to study 1 of them, where in the past you would have had to study 2. Again, stick with whatever modes that you've been practicing, and again, make sure that you know which type of question you're going for. So I'll actually talk about that a little bit later on when it comes to practicing or picking your questions. Section 3, poetry, then consists of 2 parts. It's the only part on paper 2 rather, that is subdivided. So you've got unseen poetry and prescribed poetry. The unseen poem will be accompanied by 2 different questions and you have to answer 1. And then 5 poets with 1 question each will appear in prescribed poetry and you must answer on 1 as well. Again, this is one of the slight amendments that they've made to this year's exam. So ordinarily there are 8 poets on for study and 4 come up. This year there's 8 poets on, but 5 will come up. So it basically means that it's slightly easier and there's slightly more choice there. And again, you know, play to your strengths there, you know, make sure that you go for a poet that you have studied well. And again, I'll talk to you a little bit more about choice in just a moment about that. So section 1, the single text, as I've said, for most of you, that's going to be Macbeth. It's going to be your Shakespearean. For some of you, though, it probably won't be. You know, some of you will probably opt to do Shakespeare as your comparative instead. The one thing, again, that I would say to you, although I'm sure your teachers have made you aware of this already, is that at higher level, you must answer on Shakespeare. So you must answer on Shakespeare either in your single text or in your comparative. For my own students, I always tell them to focus on character analysis first and then themes, because you need to bear in mind that any theme that is that appears is going to be illustrated through the actions or reactions or behaviours of a character or characters in the text. So if you focus on your characters first and you know them well, then a theme question shouldn't be an issue for you. Number 2, ensure that you have learned sufficient quotes. This is where, you have to have a lot of quotes learned off. Make sure that you have sufficient quotes. Try to learn as many quotes as you can, particularly for the major characters, but don't forget the more minor characters as well. And then lastly, paraphrasing is acceptable if you get stuck. So that's where you put a quote into your own words. So you can't remember exactly what it sounded like, so you put it into your own words. But you will need some accurate quotes if you wish to score highly. So it's no use to paraphrase every single quote. And the other thing is, bear in mind that a quote can literally be one word. Now, don't have all your quotes one word. Kind of vary the length of them. But bear in mind that one word does constitute a quote. And as I've said, if you get badly stuck, feel free to paraphrase. Section 2 of the comparative study then, ensure that you know the names of your 3 texts and the associated authors, playwrights, directors, etc. So obviously authors are for your novels, playwrights are for your plays, and it is the director you make reference to for those of you that are using a film, not the screenplay writer. That's actually quite a common mistake. So just make sure that you go with the director. Have abbreviations prepared if you intend to use them. So some students will opt to use abbreviations for the comparative, some won't. If you do decide to go down the abbreviation route, make sure that you make those clear in your introduction. Know what mode you have studied and make sure that you attempt whatever question or questions you have been prepared for. So most teachers will prepare their students either for the 70 mark comparative question or for the 40-30 one, which is it's divided. I know for me, I've always prepared my students for the 70 mark one. So again, don't try something new on the day. Stick with obviously something that you've been practicing. Section 3 then is prescribed poetry. This is probably the one area of paper 2 that kind of gives me anxiety, because I know people always leave themselves vulnerable here. Have at least 4 poets prepared, ideally 5. 4 means that you're guaranteed a question. 5 means that you'll have an option. So if one question is horrible, this will kind of give you a little bit more leeway there. Do not leave yourselves vulnerable here. Do not put all your eggs in one basket and hope that one poet comes up. It's just such a risk to take and it's not worth it. So have at least 4 poets prepared. Again, like for your Macbeth, make sure that you've got sufficient quotes. And then your answers should discuss a minimum of 4 poems, maximum of 5. That's entirely up to you. But 4 poems is sufficient, so just bear that in mind. And then lastly is obviously section 3, which is unseen poetry. Again, this is kind of like a lucky bag. You don't know what you're going to get. So treat it exactly as you would the comprehension on paper 1. Read it through, answer the questions. They don't expect you to have the same in-depth knowledge or understanding here that they do in the prescribed poetry section. They just expect you to be able to read a poem and to obviously comment on it briefly as well. Considering then obviously, how to approach the paper. So obviously paper 1 is tomorrow. So at 9:30 a.m, as I've said, that is going to be your first exam. And this is just kind of a rough sort of, I suppose, outline of how I would tackle the paper if I was going in the morning. So 9:30, familiarise yourself with the theme of the paper. It's written on the outside, it's on the front page, usually in bolded and capital letters. So you should be well able to kind of, figure that out for yourselves. Scan all 3 texts. So obviously each of the 3 texts will be associated with the theme, and then choose your question A and question B. So kind of do that within the first, I suppose, 5 minutes. Choose your question B first, and then obviously pick your question A from the remaining 2. At 9:35, start your question A, 50 marks, 45 minutes, and approximately 3 A4 pages, give or take. So as I said earlier on, that is reading 10 minutes, first question 10 minutes, second question 10 minutes, and then last question 15 minutes. That brings you on to 10:20 a.m. That means you should be moving on to question B at that stage. 50 marks, 45 minutes, approximately 4 A4 pages is what you should be aiming for there. Again, one of the questions that I commonly get asked is, is it not about quality over quantity? At higher level, it's about obviously striking a balance between the two. Then by the time you get on to 11:05 a.m, you should be moving on to your composing section. 100 marks, 80 minutes, and you should be at least aiming to get 6 A4 pages there, more if you can. This is the biggest question across both papers. It's worth 25% of your overall grade, and obviously the length of your answer needs to reflect that. And then by 12:25 p.m, final sweep of the paper, quick look through. If you've left any blanks, fill them in, etc. And then that will obviously bring you to the end of paper 1. And hopefully you shouldn't be too stuck for time on paper 1. You should find yourself kind of at ease. But having said that, make sure that, you don't let time run away with you either. So keep an eye on the clock in the room at all times. And if you haven't finished a question by the time your allocated time is up, move on, okay? And that's not just going to be in English, that's going to be right across the board. Then for paper 2, so this is Thursday. So for a lot of you, this will actually be probably your second exam at 2 p.m. So it's the afternoon exam on Thursday. So 2 p.m, quickly scan through the questions relevant to you in each section. So for example, in the single text, look at the questions on Macbeth, for example. And the comparative one, look at the ones on theme or issue, for example, etc. Then 2:05, start your comparative. So one of the things that you'll have noticed is I kind of tend to tell my own students to go question A, question B, composing for paper 1. For paper 2, I tend to say tackle the questions worth the most first. So you'll see I've kind of reflected that in this plan here. So go with the comparative first. It's worth the most. It's 70 marks. You have 70 minutes and it should be approximately 9 A4 pages. Now don't be intimidated by that. Break that down. That's about 3 pages discussion per text. You should have no problem in doing that. 3:15 p.m. then move on to your single text, 60 marks, 60 minutes, approximately 6 A4 pages. 4:15 p.m. prescribed poetry, 50 marks, 50 minutes, approximately 5 A4 pages. And as I've said already, discussion of 5 poems. And then lastly, about 5:05 p.m, unseen poetry, 20 marks, 15 minutes, and approximately 2 A4 pages. You will notice that at the end of paper 2, I haven't actually left room there for a final sweep of the paper. You shouldn't actually have time at the end of paper 2. You should literally still be writing as the examiner or the superintendent is taking the paper up off you. So that's always kind of why I say with paper 1, there's a bit of leeway. With paper 2, there isn't. So start out with what's worth the most and then work your way back. You can obviously use that tactic in paper 1 as well, but I don't think you'll be as stuck for time there. Normally students aren't. Whereas in paper 2, time is of the essence. So start 70 marks, then 60 marks, then 50 marks, and then 20 marks. And the reason why I say leave the 20 marker till the end is because worst case scenario, you don't get to it. You run over time on the other 3 questions. All that's at stake here is 20 marks. You run over time. Otherwise, you've got 50, 60, 70 marks at stake. And obviously that is a huge chunk of your overall grade. So I kind of hope that sort of just, will kind of settle you down and, kind of give you sort of last minute pointers, last minute time frames, just kind of quick reminders. It's stuff that I'm sure you all know already, but it is just kind of, ensuring you and kind of reassuring you at the end. And without further ado, that just kind of brings me to the end of this presentation. So I want to wish you the best of luck, obviously, with English in the morning, and obviously best of luck with the rest of your exams as well.